Good afternoon, Nick Griffin.
Good afternoon.
Let's go to the calls now. Then Thomas Curran, who's calling in from London. You're through to Nick Griffin.
Oh, good afternoon. Mr. Griffin, my son left school last summer when he was 16. Believe me, he tried everything humanly possible to get an apprenticeship. I left school just over 20 years ago. I was fortunate, as were several of my contemporaries, to get apprenticeships. I think the difference between then and now are, for instance, manufacturing has diminished, but also I feel through our experience is literally millions of dirt cheap labour migrants who have come here from the Third World and lately the former Eastern Bloc. How would you ensure my son and the million or so like him can get jobs when they leave school? Because at the moment now, it's impossible.
Nick Griffin.
Yes, Thomas, thanks. It's the big problem facing huge numbers of people in this country, and something has got to be done about it. Really, there's two strands to this. First of all, when the Labour government came to power in 1997, they actually said manufacturing industry doesn't matter anymore, we're going to be a knowledge economy and so on. Well, the things such as call centres they set up, they're going abroad now. And until we have a government which says that manufacturing industry is essential in this country, one of the most overcrowded and small islands in the world, then we're going to have a problem. We're the only people who say that. Then the other key issue, of course, is that on top of the deliberate destruction of manufacturing industry in this country through globalisation, we've also had a massive fresh wave of immigration, especially from Eastern Europe. Now, this isn't a matter of race. These people are every bit as white as anybody else. But allowing hundreds of thousands of Poles and other East Europeans into this country at a time of a recession especially was sheer madness. It's been done primarily, of course, what the other parties won't talk about is this is not anymore a matter for Westminster, because 80% of our laws, at least, and particularly how we run our economy, it's done from Europe. It's done from Brussels. That's the problem.
Thank you very much for your call, Thomas. Let's go to Lindsay McKenzie in Aberdeen now.
Hi, hello. I'm just wondering how feasible it would be to remove the staunchly quoted 2 million illegal immigrants from the UK. It's already very difficult to identify who is legal or illegal without checking documentation. So can I assume there would be some sort of mass documentation enforcement UK worldwide? And do you have figures for costs, the time, and the privacy infringements that would be necessary for something of this magnitude? And on the back of this, I'm also wondering if you have any idea of the costs, the estimated time, and the privacy infringements, say like family history records and such, that would be necessary for, as your manifesto states, to keep this mythological indigenous Brit as the majority.
Well, I think it's a serious problem that, huge numbers of British people are desperately worried about illegal immigration in particular, and the law needs to be enforced. These people, if they're in this country illegally, then, to use Chris Hoon's phrase earlier on this programme, they should be deported. As to how we're going to find them, I think, in a way, it certainly doesn't need ID cards or things like that. ID cards, I think, are fundamentally creepy aspects of a surveillance state that we do not want. I think what it needs most of all with illegal immigrants, self-evidently, they're either living here at taxpayers' expense or they're working on the black economy. So if they cannot get benefits, if they're illegal, and if we have huge fines for employers using illegal workers, then once they find after a few weeks that it's not soft touch Britain anymore, I think a lot of them will simply go to somewhere else in the world that is. So I think that would solve a lot of the problem. But you're right, there is a problem in the way the Labour Party has lost control of our borders so drastically that it's a huge issue for the public to get their minds around and for us to deal with.
Lindsay.
Well, I didn't expect well, I don't think that really answered the question. I mean, the idea that, as I already said, it's very difficult to identify legal or illegal immigrants in the UK, and I know that perhaps isn't the problem, Nick Griffin's problem, but this is a programme for him. I think that the idea to claim that you can simply remove 2 million illegal immigrants, which is a number like that, is just it's unfeasible and unrealistic. And I just think it's another part of the BNP's populist rhetoric that is just unenforceable and just illogical.
But Lindsay, surely we can't just give up and say, well, because a lot of people have broken the law, we'll let them break the law, we'll let more people break the law. Those 2 million or so illegal immigrants are placing an intolerable burden on the taxpayers of this country of all colours, on our health service, on our housing, on our transport system. It's a problem which politicians have to be brave enough to address, and it has to be dealt with. And most of all, this is a democracy, and the majority of British people want this issue addressed. So it's up to us politicians to do it for them.
OK, thank you very much indeed for calling, Lindsay. To Cardiff now and to Abigail Maxwell.
Hello, Mr. Griffin.
Hello.
Oldham Council is reorganising its schools to get a more even racial mix of pupils. And they're doing this to reduce racial tension. I have two questions for you. The first is, do you think reducing racial tension is a good thing? And the second is, do you think this policy of the Oldham Council is a better way of reducing racial tension than sending third-generation British people to a foreign country?
Thank you. I do think it's important to reduce racial tension. The best way to do that is to stop bringing more people into this country, the most overcrowded country in Europe, and give us a chance to breathe and a chance to assimilate what we have here. Now, I'm fairly familiar with Oldham. I stood there in 2001, and I can tell you that I'm still in touch with people there, and that the council and the government are spending hundreds of millions of pounds in places like that, not on a policy which is designed to reduce tension, but on a policy of forced integration. And I can tell you that in places like Oldham and places in Burnley, it's not just the English parents, the Irish parents and so on, who don't want, say, Catholic schools integrated with Muslim schools. It's the Muslim schools as well. There was 800 parents marched through Oldham spontaneously a couple of months ago saying, do not integrate these schools. And where the schools have been integrated in Burnley, the result of integrating them hasn't been less racial tension. Burnley has seen repeated race riots in its recently integrated schools.
Let Abigail
it's
respond to that. Abigail.
Well, I was proud, actually, living in Oldham, that Oldham refused several times to elect you as a local councillor. And reducing racial tension means happier, safer people, even less likely to vote for you. And I'm glad to say that it is working in Oldham, which has not been so successful for the BNP electorally as you might have hoped.
Thank you very much indeed, Abigail.
Can I just say
Mr. Griffin, you do keep saying that Britain's the most densely populated country in Europe. That's not correct, is it? I mean, according to the UN figures, there are plenty of other countries like Belgium and Netherlands are more densely populated than Britain.
To be fair, it's England and Wales. Scotland makes a difference. So England,
in your manifesto,
so thank you for the correction. In fact, it's England and Wales, and England and Wales are more overcrowded than anywhere in Europe except for Malta.
Well, your manifesto actually says Britain, so that's false in your manifesto, is it then?
It's a fault in the manifesto. I blame the proofreader.
Let's go to Alan Cook now, who's calling in from Clapham in London.
Mr. Griffin, London is a very gross, overpopulated place. Now, do you think that measures ought to be made to educate people to either leave London and go and live somewhere else, smaller town cities, and also to educate people in other towns and cities that London is a great problematical place, a lot of crime, violence, etc., and that they should think twice about coming here?
Well, certainly, you're right. London is overcrowded, and London has got lots of problems, including crime, and some of those, I think, are a reflection of the fact it is drastically overcrowded. But I think most people know that. What London needs is a halt to any further immigration, because it's one of the great immigration magnets of the world, and it's grotesquely unfair on people who've lived in London for decades, wherever their original background is from. People who've paid taxes in London, who've lived in London, who've helped build London. It should be their kids at the front of the housing queue, their kids at the front of the schools queue. And if that was imposed, then London would be a far less attractive place for more people to crowd into.
It's not what businesses in London say, though, do they? They don't want to halt an immigration. People in the city of London are very worried about that.
Indeed, and here's really the rub, because all this mass immigration business, all this diversity, is not really about multiculturalism and love and being nice to people. It's about making big profits for big business by driving down ordinary workers' wages.
Well, big
That's
profits
the
for
problem
big
with
business
immigration.
is what generates the economy, isn't it? It creates wealth for the country.
Well, when it results in 8 million Brits of working age being, not economically active, partly because of the competition, very fierce competition from recently arrived immigrants who'll work for a fraction of what you really need to live in this country, it's a disaster. It's actually very expensive. It's profitable for business. It's very costly for our society. And that's what I'm more worried about.
Alan Cook, thank you for your call. To Bridgend now and to Simon Green. You're through to Nick Griffin.
Hi. Yes, I'd like to query Nick Griffin on something. I had a leaflet. I live in the Bridgend constituency. I had a leaflet through my door yesterday asking me to vote for the British National Party. And there's a photograph of yourself in the bottom right-hand corner alongside Winston Churchill. Mm-hmm. I'd just like to know what exactly do you have in common with Winston Churchill? And I don't think Winston Churchill was ever a member of the British National Party.
He certainly wasn't. It wasn't around in those days.
Your views.
Yeah, well, Winston Churchill was a great British politician, and if he were around now and he were to repeat what he said about the dangers of mass immigration, if he were to repeat what he